Hello everybody, it's Kara from Wild Book Garden, and today I am here with part 1 of my May wrap-up. I think this is only going to be 2 parts this time because even though I did read a lot of books, quite a few of them are for like secret TBR projects, so I won't be wrapping those up here. So the first book I'm going to talk about is The Murder of Mr Wickham by Claudia Gray. I received this review copy in exchange for an honest review, which I will link down below. It is spoiler free, and this is a mystery novel. Why am I holding it on that side? I usually do this side. So this is a mystery novel that is also kind of a Jane Austen retelling or epilogue. It involves a lot of different characters from her novels, and as you can probably guess by the title, Mr. Wickham shows up at this house party and then he is mysteriously murdered, and it has to be one of the people in the house. And so 2 kids of some of the characters in the other novels, I won't spoil who in case you don't want to know that, but because of alibi reasons, they're pretty much the only ones they know definitively didn't do it, and so the 2 of them start kind of working together to try and figure out some clues, figure out who killed Mr. Wickham and why, because there's a lot of suspects, as you might guess. And just check out my review if you want detailed thoughts, but I really love this. I do think that expectation could be part of why this is working for some people and not for others. If you read a lot of like mystery thrillers and you're coming to this book for that, you might be disappointed because even though I really liked the mystery piece of this, it's more about seeing Jane Austen's characters interact with the mystery, and I feel like the characterization and the historical setting and the retelling aspects are really what shown in this book for me. So I did really enjoy that, and I really enjoyed our main characters as well. I think all the characters were very well developed. I really loved the writing style. I thought the historical setting was great. Like, it's always fun to get a Jane Austen retelling where you can tell that the author is so knowledgeable and passionate about the source material, so would definitely recommend this, and I gave The Murder of Mr Wickham 4.5 stars. Oh, something else I want to mention is I know some people were not pleased with the pacing of this. We know I don't usually care about pacing, so that's part of it, but I also think that the slow build worked for the story. Like, this really is not about having the twistiest murder mystery, you know, like that's not what this book is trying to do. So if you go in expecting a pace suited to that, I think you'll be disappointed, but I enjoyed it. Next, I finished Brine and Bone by Kate Stradling. This is a pretty short novella that is a retelling of The Little Mermaid. And yeah, like this is my second Kate Stradling book, and I am just so impressed at how creative her retellings are. Like, I read a lot of them, and I don't necessarily go to retellings to read something that no one has ever done before, but I think it can be fun to get that. And this was a really interesting take. So if you know The Little Mermaid story at all, we're basically following as the main character the human girl who rescues the prince, who is often viewed as like the antagonist, and instead she's the main character here, and I really liked that perspective. I thought her, what was her name? Magdalena. I thought Magdalena and Finian, the 2 leads, were really interesting. I thought the Little Mermaid character was fascinating, the way she was written. I'm really impressed with the way Kate Stradling incorporated different parts of the fairy tale into her own story. Yeah, like I was really enjoying this. I do think that Magdalena's emotions and responses felt kind of repetitive at the beginning, especially for such a short story, but as the story went on, I think that made more sense. Like, I think that felt more like a distinctive choice, and I think it worked for the story. I do think that there's this one character who's like a captain who, the way he was introduced, he came off as like super sleazy, and then I think we were actually supposed to like him. So I had some issues with that, and I also feel like the writing was kind of clunky in places, so there were a few things that I wasn't loving about this book, but the thing that bumped it up to a 4 stars for me was the ending. And like literally there's like an epilogue of 2 pages that elevated this from like a 3.5 or a 3.75 to a 4 stars. Like, it just made me very emotional, like the way that Kate Stradling like pulled things together from the original fairy tale and pulled that into her story, and the emotional impact of the ending I think is fantastic. So yeah, really excited to continue reading more from Kate Stradling, and I gave Brine and Bone 4 stars. Next, I finished Rose and the Magician's Mask by Holly Webb. This is the 3rd book in the, I always do this, I think it's just the Rose series. And we're following our main character, Rose, who at the beginning of the first book, she goes off to work, like she's from an orphanage, she goes off to work as a maid in a wealthy house, and the house is owned by Mr. Fountain, who is one of the most important court magicians, and the magic is not really trusted by a lot of non-magical people. Like in the house that Rose is working in, like basically all of the servants really distrust magic, even though their employer has it, and so when Rose starts figuring out that maybe she has magical abilities, she's really not happy about that, but she is obviously coming to terms with that throughout the series. And in this third book, we have a change of setting that I thought was really interesting. Rose and our group of main characters end up going to Venice for like various plot and political reasons. I'm also always really impressed at the way that Holly Webb can take such short novels, like they're all around I think 200 pages that I've read from her so far, and she can tell such a full and complete story with like full and complete characters. With most of her books, the ending always feels a little bit rushed, but that doesn't really bother me because I know to expect that. And I continue to enjoy this cast of characters. As I have said multiple times, I think, I'm warming up to the characters that I didn't think I would at the beginning. Like Bella, I still have some issues with her, but she, as I said last time, she is growing on me. And I really like the friend group. I think that Holly Webb does a really great job with like friend groups and character dynamics. I find Rose a very engaging main character. Like I said, I enjoyed the setting. I am a little bummed that, like, because I was really excited about the concept of like Venetian mask magic. I thought that was so cool. And then we get here and the way it's like portrayed is like, oh, this is bad magic. Like it's pretty much always like portrayed in a very sinister way. So that was kind of a bummer. But other than that, I did enjoy this and I gave Rose and the Magician's Mask 4 stars. Next, I finished A Rhythm of Prayer, which is edited by Sarah Bessey, featuring writing by Amina Brown, Barbara Brown Taylor, Lisa Sharon Harper, and more. The subtitle is A Collection of Meditations for Renewal. So I've been reading this over quite a long period of time. I would just read a little bit of it almost every night. And these are kind of like prayers or meditations, and I really loved this. Like I've read a few of this kind of book by now, and this is I think one of the best I've read. If you're looking for something like this, I would highly recommend this one. I especially love that this one has so many like prayers and meditations that focus on like righteous anger and being like really upset at the state that the world is in, and being so frustrated that you cannot force people to care about other people. And there's just like a lot of stuff in here that is like really hitting me and speaking to me very personally. So like I definitely resonated with this collection. As with anything like this, there's going to be some that work for you more than others, like depending on the individual reader, but there were a lot that I really loved. Again, just, yeah, that anger is something I'm really resonating with lately. And this is like a very hopeful collection as well, but I think, I've said this before, but I think the way that hope feels justified is if you also acknowledge how bad things are. And I feel like this collection really did that. So I thought this was fantastic. Again, if you're in the market for something like this, I think this is a really excellent one. And I gave A Rhythm of Prayer 5 stars. Oh, I also did really appreciate the diversity of contributors here. That's something that Sarah Bessey and the other people involved in collecting this book, they clearly were very passionate about, and I really appreciate the variety of perspectives we got here, and how that interacted with the different prayers, meditations, entries, and like the different like takes on theology and the different things that these writers talked about. So really loved that as well. Next, I finished Liberating Fight by Melissa McShane. This is the 5th book in the Extraordinary series, which I've been talking about a lot lately, so you probably are sick of hearing like the general overview, but this is a historical fantasy series that is set during the Napoleonic War, but there's magic. And each of our main characters, this is a companion series, each of our main characters is a woman who is an extraordinary in a different ability. There are 8 different kinds of abilities, and if you're an extraordinary, you have obviously like superpowered abilities, like you have extra power, but you can also do different things with that power than regular talented people can do, and not everybody is talented in this world. And yeah, this is the 5th book. We are following Amaya as our main character, who, as the author always does, it was introduced in the previous book. Amaya is a Spanish woman who grew up primarily with the Incas, and so at this point now she is back in Europe, and she's really having a hard time adjusting. This is a very different, obviously, culture and setting than she is used to. And then she ends up going to Spain to possibly connect with some of her family from that side of her family. There's a lot of political things going on with Spain. Amaya is also confronted with like this revolution that is happening or trying to happen in Spain, and where she's going to fall on that. And I really enjoyed this entry. One thing that I have consistently loved across all of the books in this series I've read so far are the female characters, or just like the main characters in general, because I also tend to really like the love interests. But I adore Amaya. She is just so smart and determined and compassionate, and I found her a very, very engaging and sympathetic character. I think the way this book portrays her being caught between different parts of her family and different cultures and different places that she calls home, I think that was very poignant. I also appreciate that it wasn't like the story wasn't like she gets to Europe and she's like, wow, this is so much more advanced than what I knew. Like, there are some things that she likes or appreciates about England, but there's also things where she's like, the Incas did this better, which I appreciate, and I think that is much more honest and respectful, and it just made sense. And I really liked her love interest as well. This is probably, in like the top few romances for me. Like I really, really enjoyed their developing relationship. I have a soft spot for characters who are like, they act like they're really frivolous and they don't care about anything, but they actually have this really good heart and they're really brave and they really like care very deeply about doing the right thing. I just really love that. And also, even though the character is kind of, I don't know if I would go so far as to call him a reformed rake. I don't know that he was that bad, but he was kind of one of those characters who is very, he kind of treats women as like disposable a little bit, like in the earlier part of his life. But the reason that I still liked him and I liked his and Amaya's relationship is for a couple reasons. I don't like when there's a male character who like treats women like trash until he finds like the one who is worthy of changing his mind. And that didn't happen in this book. And the reason I feel like it didn't feel like that is because he actually admits that his inability to like commit or to like treat a woman well is because of him and not because of the like failings that the women had, which I appreciate, and also because of the equality of the character dynamic between him and Amaya. Like it's not the typical like, oh, he's so experienced and she's not at all, which I really appreciate. I think that took a lot of the icky power dynamic away that can often happen with characters like that. So I really enjoyed their relationship. I'm also very, very interested to see the next book in this series. Like I think that's going to be a really interesting one. So I really liked this. I also feel like most of the books in the series have done a much better job of grappling with the colonialism that is inherent in these stories than like book 3 that I talked about. That was the one that was set in India. So far I feel like that's been kind of the one-off. Like overall I think the books do a much better job than that one did, which I'm happy to see. So I really enjoyed this and I gave Liberating Fight 4 stars. Next I finished Doll Bones by Holly Black, and I actually listened to a good chunk of this on audio, which was narrated by Nick Podell, who I think did an excellent job with this audiobook. Like I'm really impressed especially at the way that he did young female characters' voices, because that's something that not all male narrators are great at. So I really appreciated that, and this just shows what an audiobook newbie I am, because I was listening to this, I'm like, he is so talented. I should look up to see if there's any other audiobooks he did that I might be interested in. And like, lo and behold, he is like a very well-known audiobook narrator who's won like a bunch of awards for it and everything. But hey, that shows I have good taste. So this is a very short middle grade spooky story, and it is illustrated. Let me find who the illustrator is. Eliza Wheeler. So there's some like illustrations there, and as you can probably tell, it involves a creepy doll. So our main character, Zach, is he and two of his friends, they play this like imagination game, and one of the kind of characters that they use is represented by this creepy looking doll that one of them owns. So his two friends are Poppy and Alice, and Poppy says like that she's been having dreams about this doll who they call the Queen, and that they have to basically like put her to rest. Like that there's like that this doll is connected to a murder that happened that wasn't really solved, and that they need to like bury her and like put her to rest, which is at like a different town, so they have to like travel there. And also there's a lot of like interpersonal conflict with their friend group, because Zach's father does something that means that he's not really going to be able to play with them in the same way, and it hurts so much that he doesn't want to tell them the truth, and so he just says that he wants to stop playing. So they're all kind of in the middle of this like friendship conflict while they're also trying to bring this doll back to her resting place. And yeah, I thought this was really well done. I remember a few years ago a lot of booktubers were reading this and giving it very mediocre reviews, and I'm thinking now that was just before I started following people who respected middle grade, because this was, I think, excellent. I think the writing was really well done. I really loved Zach and felt for him. I loved him as a main character, and my heart hurt for him so much. I was so angry at his father. I also really enjoyed Poppy and Alice, like his friends, and like their friend group, and I love how this book talks about the like bittersweetness of getting older. And I also think this book comments on toxic masculinity. Like, it doesn't use that phrase, but I think that's part of what's going on here. And just like this idea of kids being forced to grow up too fast, and like that there's nothing wrong if your like teenage son wants to continue playing imagination games. Like, let him play. I also like how it talks about this confusing age of like transition almost. Like, I forget how old they're supposed to be, but it's like kind of around that preteen age of like 11 to 13, where you're like not a little kid, but you're not a high schooler, and you're just like doing your best, like figuring things out, friendship, and maybe like first crushes, and like how that can leave some kids behind. And it's just, I just thought it was really very nuanced. I found the plot and the atmosphere very like gripping, very spooky, and I also found the resolution and the overall story of this one to be satisfying. So I just thought this was really well done, and I gave Dollbones 4 stars. Next, I finished The Trouble with Good Ideas by Amanda Panich. We are following our main character Leah, who is a young Jewish girl who is transferring to a public school for the first time. I think it's for the first time, or maybe she's been there for a little while now, and she's really upset because she finds out that her great-grandfather, Leah's parents and like Leah's aunts and uncles are planning to transfer him to like an assisted living facility because he is dealing with dementia, and that they don't think it's safe for him to stay at home anymore. And Leah is really upset about that. She loves her great grandpa, and she doesn't think that he needs that help. She doesn't think there's anything that wrong with him. And he had been telling her stories, and one of the stories he told her was about a golem that helped protect their Jewish community, I think around the time of World War II. And Leah figures she has nothing to lose, so when she comes across something that seems like it's connected to that story, she uses it, and it works, and she does actually create a golem. And Leah has created this golem to try and the golem's job is to protect her great-grandfather and to make sure he doesn't hurt himself. And because if he can keep living by himself, like if Leah can prove to her parents and her aunts and uncles that her great-grandfather is fine, then of course he won't have to go to an assisted living facility, she thinks. And so she tells the golem to like keep out of the way, don't let people know she's doing this, but to like protect her great-grandfather. But then of course things don't go according to plan. Lee starts getting very scared because the golem is maybe not listening to her, and not doing what she's supposed to, not always telling her the truth. And Leah is struggling to know what to do because she doesn't know, like, she didn't hear in the story from her great-grandfather like what you're supposed to do, as the synopsis says, when a golem turns against its creator. This book also talks a lot about Leah's Jewish culture and background, some of the practices, and it does deal with anti-Semitism in a way that is, I think, very honest, very difficult to read, but that still does a good job of making it approachable for a younger audience since this is a middle grade book. And yeah, I thought this was very well done, very effective. I did really feel for Leah, and for what she was going through and like the difficulty she had in accepting that her great-grandfather was sick. I also really loved her family, like her relationship with her family in general, like her parents and her great-grandfather and a couple of her cousins who she's really close with. I really enjoyed that. I do think there were parts of the plot that, like, I don't know, I think they were maybe telegraphed for a little too long, and that sometimes made the book feel more frustrating than it needed to. And I know that like one argument could be that this is for young readers, so like of course things aren't going to feel as obvious, but as somebody who reads a lot of middle grade books, I know that there are ways that you can lead up to something that an adult knows is coming without making it feel like we're just dragging out the book. Do you know what I mean? But this was still very good, and I gave The Trouble with Good Ideas 4 stars. Next, I finished Promises and Primroses by Josie S. Kilpack. This is a proper romance that is the first book in the Mayfield family series. And this is a book where, like, just by itself, I probably wouldn't have picked it up because the tropes are not my thing, like not something that would appeal to me. Because we have a second chance romance, we have a like widowed character finding love again, and we have like kids involved, which like well-written kid characters are something I love in any genre, but for specifically romance, it's not like a pull for me. So there's like a lot of reasons why I would normally not have picked this up because I didn't think it would be for me. But the reason that I did is that I actually have read and reviewed a later book in this series that I really enjoyed. I'll link that review if you're interested, and you can definitely read them separately. And I'm really interested in all of the other books in this series, so it felt kind of weird to me to only skip book number 1. So I was like, well, I know it'll at least be well written, and it was. And considering that these tropes are not my thing, I think this went fairly well. So we're following 4 different perspectives and 2 different romances. Arguably, I think the main romance focus is Julia and Peter. Julia ends up being a governess for Peter's 2 young daughters. His wife died a couple of years ago, and they don't hit it off well because like Peter can be very frustrating. I understand why where he's coming from and why he's so concerned about like appearances and stuff based on his family history. But one of the reasons they don't hit it off well is because he is really uncomfortable with the fact that Julia is like very young and attractive, and he feels like that like the fact that he notices that she's attractive like bothers him, and so he kind of like he doesn't even want to hire her at first, and he like kind of tries to cut her off from any like personal interaction, and it takes a while for him to get over that, and that could be frustrating, but I got where he was coming from. And then obviously there's like the class issue between them and the fact that like he is her employer. I feel like this book did a pretty good job of dealing with that and navigating that. And then our other romance actually involves, is this a spoiler? I can't tell if that's a spoiler or not. So basically the other two characters are connected to Julia and Peter, and theirs is a second chance romance, and it's not just like a misunderstanding, it's kind of like a series of circumstances and misunderstandings that broke them up, and then many years later they are kind of reconnecting. And yeah, like I said, this went pretty well, considering. I'll start with the things that I did like. I found Julia and Peter very likable as main characters. Again, Peter could be frustrating, but I think his actions made sense. I also think the kids were really well written. That's something that, like I said, I appreciate when kids are like written as fully developed people. There's also a lot of stuff about dogs that was really lovely, although that could be hard to read at times because Peter breeds dogs. That's one of the things that he does on his estate. So that was really lovely. And Julia actually has like a history of like working with them, like from her family. So it was really nice to see her be so knowledgeable and competent about that. I also think this book had some very interesting things to say about bitterness and forgiveness. There's a scene between Julia and her mother at the end that I thought was really lovely. And not like forgiveness like somebody hurt you and you let them off the hook. This is like, I think what this book was getting at is that there's sometimes where you have forgiven the person, like you have accepted that you misjudged somebody, but you're tempted to hold on to that feeling of anger because it might hurt too much to let that go. And that's what I think this book was talking about, which I thought was interesting. And like I said, the writing quality is always very nice. I did have some issues though. So for one thing, I found Julia's mother to be incredibly frustrating for part of it. And I understand that a good chunk of that is like the point of her character arc. But it went on, I think, for way too long. It was very, very irritating to see her be so willing to ruin her daughter's chance of happiness based on something that was kind of unreasonable. And like, I see why she would have these very strong feelings, but it was to the point where like, I think she should have realized that what she thought was happening was not happening, if that makes sense. And I also found the conflict between her and her love interest to be very frustrating at times for kind of similar reasons. Like, it just was dragged out, and the number of times that like they were talking and then somebody would almost explain the truth, but then they'd get upset and they wouldn't, was infuriating. I thought that happened too many times. I also think it's a little weird that Julia makes this big stand with her mother about like finding her own path to happiness and how that's not the same as what her mother wants, because I thought that was a really great scene, but that's kind of defeated by the fact that this is a romance novel and that Julia in fact does end up doing what her mother wants her to do. Like, I get what she's saying and her point still stands about it being her life, but I just think that was an odd way to phrase it in a novel where she is gonna actually do what her mother wanted her to do, which is to like marry and settle down with a family. I don't know, I think that was a weird choice. But then like my biggest issue with this is this stupid marriage campaign, which is kind of like the premise of like the whole series. And when I read the later book in the series, we didn't get a lot of detail about it, as I recall. Like, we knew enough to understand what was going on, and I was fine with it because it explained the setup, because the romance in that one was a marriage of convenience. And so this like marriage deal made sense because it like set up this marriage of convenience trope to happen. So I was fine with it. But in this book, we get like a very detailed explanation of it, and I kind of hate it. I wish that we had known less because it really pissed me off. And part of that is because Elliot, the character who comes up with it, is like a point of view character in this and one of the love interests. So we spend a lot of time with him and a lot of time hearing about his stupid marriage scheme, and it really pissed me off. There's also some very classist undertones to it, which Amelia calls him on at one point, but then like the way the book ends, it kind of seems like she's gonna come around to it, and I don't know, the whole premise of this marriage campaign, I think it just really grosses me out. It's super manipulative. I just don't like the implications of it. So I don't know, I'm still excited for the other books in the series, but I am really hoping that we don't dwell on that, because I don't like that we got all that explanation for it here. But overall, I do think this was a well done book. I think if you like the romance tropes in here more than I do, you would probably enjoy it even more. But I gave Promises and Primroses 3.5 stars. Okay, and then the last book I'm going to talk about for this wrap up, or this part of the wrap up, is Anarchists on the Orient Express by Susanna Roundtree. This is the second book in the Miss Sharp's Monsters series. Our main character is Liz Sharp, who has grown up at this kind of training school that is supposedly for like fallen women, like young ladies. And what it actually is it's training them to be bodyguards. And in this world there are like vampires and werewolves and other kind of magical creatures, and those are like the royal houses and the noble houses of Europe. So something I've said I really like about this series before is the way that it literalizes the idea of powerful men like preying on younger women, especially like lower class women. I just think that's really interesting. And Liz was attacked by a werewolf, and she doesn't remember anything about that. But people who have been marked in this way, specifically young women, they are viewed as, again, like fallen women, that like they have sold their blood or their body to these monsters. And so they're not treated very well because of that. And so Liz ends up going to be a bodyguard slash attendant for Princess May, who is this like kind of lower princess, lesser princess of one of the royal houses, who they are planning to marry her into one of the royal families. And then in this second book, it's called Anarchists on the Orient Express, so they do spend a chunk of this book on the Orient Express, and Liz actually ends up running into somebody who says that he knows her from her previous life that she doesn't remember, that he remembers her from before, from the time when she doesn't have any memories. And she, like, Liz is really understandably determined to figure out her past and to try and figure out who this person is. So she tries to pursue this. She ends up getting dragged into this like revolution, these kind of like anarchist plots that are going on in Europe. And yeah, this was really interesting. I definitely enjoyed this book. I think I liked it a little less than book one, but it was still very well done. I definitely preferred the parts of the story that were actually set on the Orient Express as opposed to the other stuff. But I do think the plot was interesting. I continue to really love our cast of characters. There's an inspector who is being set up as Liz's love interest, and I really like him. I really like their interactions together. I also really like the humor in this series and like the writing I just really enjoy. I also think in this book specifically, the like romantic confusion I think is written very convincingly, because Liz obviously is developing romantic feelings for this inspector character, but then also this man who says that he knows her. They were apparently like in love before and possibly even engaged, I don't remember, and Liz kind of has this remnant of feeling close to him. And then there's also this other character, Vasily, who is a vampire, and his interactions with Liz are very interesting because she is very aware of how dangerous he is, and she's kind of tempted by the sense of adventure that he presents, but like this never ends up feeling like a, like, I don't know, a frustrating like love triangle or love square situation. It just feels like a character who is understandably very confused by these conflicting like emotions and like information that she's getting from people. So I don't know if I'm describing that well, but like basically that is something that normally I think would have annoyed me, and it didn't annoy me here. I think it was done really well. And speaking of Vasily, he is a very interesting character. I am very disappointed in the decision he makes at the end of this book, but not surprised perhaps. I am very interested to see how he's going to be, like how he's going to develop in later books. And even though I feel like from the information we got, I think he was doing, like, I think it was their only option, but I still understand why, like, why Liz would feel this was unacceptable. As far as things I didn't like I said, I think the Orient Express setting was like the most fun part, so I wish we had spent more time there. I also think that some of the conflict frustrated me, the way that played out. And also there's a lot of discussions in this book about like violence and justice and how much violence is justified for justice. That's redundant, but you know what I mean. Because I get what Liz is saying. Like, I agree with her about, like, you know, hurting innocent people is not the answer, but I wish there would have been more time spent on the horrible treatment that the like ordinary people of Europe were experiencing at this time. Like, why maybe they would have felt pushed to do some of the things that they were doing. Again, not that I think this book should excuse that, and like, we did talk about that some. I just wish there had been more balance between that, like in terms of the time spent on those things. And then also, this is a very minor thing, but I just wanted to mention, I find it annoying that like we have all of these really interesting magical creatures. Like, there's like vampires and werewolves and sirens and dragons from all these different countries, and then the US gets like freaking bionic arms or something, which sounds so dumb in comparison. It's just like a throwaway comment. Like, I even said in my Goodreads review that Susanna Roundtree is an Australian author, and so this could have been a funny way of, like, I don't know, referencing the fact that, like, fantasy novels and publishing in general is very US-centric, so I totally get that. I just, like, I wish that they hadn't even been mentioned, because in comparison, that is just such a lame, like, power or creature, so but that's a very minor complaint. But yeah, I did enjoy this. I'm excited to continue the series, and I gave Anarchist on the Orient Express 4 stars. Okay everybody, so that was the first part of my May wrap-up. Maybe this is a little premature to say, but I think this is one of the shorter wrap-ups I've filmed recently, so very excited about that. Please comment down below and let me know if you have read any of these books, what you thought of them, or if you're going to pick them up. And let me know a book that you were pleasantly surprised by, that basically you saw a lot of mediocre reviews for and you were kind of like hesitant, but then you finally read it and it was great, because that's how I felt about Doll Bones. Thank you guys so much for watching. I will see you soon with another video, and I hope you love the next book you read. Bye! I feel like there's a real blue moment happening with these book spines, like all except I think one has blue on it.